Well, grace and peace, everyone. Grace and peace to everyone on Zoom. Grace and peace to everyone on Facebook. Grace and peace to everyone on YouTube and Twitter. Grace and peace to all those who are calling in. As we like to say from Scripture, this is the day that the Lord has made. We shall rejoice and be glad in it. We welcome all of you to what is our second session in a series on personal and public health, as we feature the wonderful teaching and instruction of Dr. Michael Forbes, MD. I'm not one to say this very often, but this is one of those occasions when I'm going to do it. If you did not or were not able to participate in the first session, you missed it. It really was an exciting and wonderful session. So therefore, I'm happy to say that I know that we're in for a real blessing. This is a time and a way for us to reimagine the way in which we look to the scriptures and apply our faith, because we realize that the scriptures give us instruction on how to live healthy and to be whole. But as well, this is a time in which we seek as a church to partner with other entities within our community to address issues that are pertinent, not only to the faith per se, but pertinent to public and personal health. And so this is an exciting time in which Baptist Temple works in conjunction with the BTC Incorporated 501c3 that is headed up by our executive director, Dr. Monica Rees. And we're also excited that this has been facilitated by none other than Reverend Denise Walker, who's been a wonderful liaison and consultant to this project. With that being said, allow me to do a bit of a framing, and then I want to introduce to some and reintroduce to others Dr. Forbes. So why don't we do this framing, shall we? And it comes to us from the book of 3 John, chapter 1, verses 1 through 4, and it reads, "The elder to the beloved Gaius, whom I love in truth. Beloved, I pray that you may prosper in all things and be in health, just as your soul prospers. For I rejoiced greatly when brethren came and testified of the truth that is in you, just as you walk in truth. I have no greater joy than to hear that my children walk in truth." I want to zero in for just a minute on verse 2. Beloved, I pray that you may prosper in all things and be in health, just as your soul prospers. A part of tonight, as I aforementioned, is to make sure that we're making a true connection between the way the scriptures instruct us to live as healthy and whole and instruction that we receive from subject matter experts like our guest for tonight, Dr. Forbes. But also, we want to be sure that the church and community are in lockstep. And as I think about it, there may not be a better scripture than this 3 John chapter 1 scripture. For the writer of this great epistle is writing a general epistle, not only to the church, but by extension to those who are connected to that church. And think about it. What the writer says is, it is his prayer that they might prosper, but to prosper in all things and be in health. That hopefully lands on your spirit. That the prayer is, as exhibited and exclaimed through this writing, that the people might prosper and prosper in all things, and as contingent to that prosperity, they might be in good health And lastly, let me say this before I introduce Dr. Forbes and reintroduce him. Think about this. The writer of this letter, 3rd John, is trying to make an equivalency that he not only wants them to prosper in all things and be in health, but knowing that their soul has already been prospering with regard to their relationship with God through Christ. He wants them to be in good health and to prosper just like their soul prospers. What a great framing for us tonight, knowing that as we are reminded through Scripture, our God wants us to prosper in all things and be in good health, to not only prosper in our soul, but to prosper in every aspect of health, body, soul, and spirit. If you can hear me, say amen. With that as a framing, let me introduce and reintroduce our guest instructor for tonight, Dr. Michael Forbes, MD. He is a pediatric and adolescent intensivist, researcher, and physician executive at Akron's Children's Hospital in Akron, Ohio. Right now, he focuses on unraveling the complexities of health services delivery for critically ill infants, children, and young adults. He's also the interim Noah Miller Chair of Pediatric Medicine at Akron Children's Hospital, as well as the professor and chair of the Department of Pediatrics at the Northeast Ohio Medical University. His recent efforts have focused on the integration of a myriad of clinical and administrative data sets to gain additional insights into systems of care across the entire continuum, from primary care to recovery after hospitalization, as well as the impact of pediatric critical illness on families and communities. He received his bachelor's degree in chemistry from the University of Pittsburgh, then his doctorate from the University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine. Thereafter, he went on to complete his residency and was appointed chief resident of the Pittsburgh Children's Hospital of the UPMC. He was awarded a fellowship in critical care medicine at the Pittsburgh Children's Hospital of UPMC, followed by acceptance into the mid-career investigator program with the National Institutes of Health Pediatric Critical Care and Trauma Scientist Development Program. In 2013, he completed the National Library of Medicine's Biomedical Informatics and Data Science Research Training Program at Woods Hole in Massachusetts. He's married to Dr. Yolanda Moore Forbes. Since 1986, they were married in the Hill District of Pittsburgh, and they are the proud parents of 2 adult children. With that being said, beloved, I want you all to join me, whether on Zoom, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter. I want you to join me in once again welcoming our guest instructor, none other than the Dr. Michael Forbes. Let's give him a rousing welcome.
Thank you.
As he comes.
Thank you, Pastor Lau. Thank you. And thank all of you for joining. Looking forward to a great time of discussion. Just like last week, I'll introduce some concepts, really more talking points than anything else, and really want to hear what you have to say, what your questions are, so that we can learn from and teach one another. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, if I could. And let's see. Yeah, you should be able to see that. So, I want to thank Pastor Lal again. I want to thank Executive Pastor Denise Walker and all of you for this invitation to share. It's always fun for me to share about the things that I'm passionate about. From even before medical school, recognizing the importance of public health and private choices and the interplay between those two. So this is, I can feel like I can talk about this all night long, but I won't. They've given me 3 sessions to be able to outline some of the things that really kind of get into this intersection between public health and private choices and how it matters. Last week, we talked about COVID because it's everywhere all the time. It's what everyone is talking about, and we can certainly harken back to that if there are some questions or comments that remain. But I do want you to know, by training, as you know, I'm a pediatric intensivist, so I take care of critically ill and injured infants, children, and young adults up until the age of 26, and occasionally beyond the age of 26. And I'm committed, like all physicians and those in healthcare, to prevent what's preventable. There are some things that happen in this life. Again, as a person who works in the ICU, I have seen children die. And so I do understand the unfairness of life, the imbalance of life, the disparities that are very clear in healthcare between those who have and those who don't have. And so there's lots of work to do for everybody. So I'm particularly grateful to you, Pastor Lyle, and for the church, that you have taken it upon yourselves to do what Becky Bickle said years and years ago when she talked about getting out of the salt shaker and into the world. Because it's very easy to preach a perfect gospel and live a perfect gospel, if you may, in the pews, from the pulpit, etc. But as Dr. Martin Luther King used to say after his sermons, now comes the living, right? And so being able to get out of the salt shaker and talk about the things that everyone is talking about can really make a huge difference. We know that knowledge is power. And you've quoted scripture. I'll quote another one where the Lord reminds us that my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. And so I want to dive in here and get into public health and personal choices. And today's session, we're going to explore and unwrap what I call lifestyle diseases. So this is called Lifestyle Diseases and Me. So why this teaching series? Again, Pastor Lyle can give you kind of where his vision came for this, but it's apparent to me in our discussions and in hearing where Denise's heart is, where his heart is, that there's a lot of ignorance out there. And public health is complicated. It is not simple. For me as a math person, I love numbers now. In high school, I did not love numbers that much. But I wish for every calculus class that's taught, we would teach a class in biostatistics, because most people aren't doing integrals and partial differential equations every day, but every single day we are being called upon to understand statistics. And so if there are any educators out there who are involved in either public or private education at the secondary and post-secondary levels, please begin the introduction of statistics in elementary school, because that's the future. You have to be able to understand risk. You have to be able to understand partial risk. And here we go. You have to be able to make decisions about yourself and others with missing information. Because as much as we can do and much as we've accomplished in healthcare and science and medicine, there's so much that we don't know. All right. And so you have to be able to make confident, capable, competent decisions when you don't have all the information. Right. And so even though it's science, and even though math is math and 1 and 1 will always be 2, we don't know everything. And there are a lot of wild cards in this life, right? And it's tilted and it's unfair. And so we need to get as much information as we possibly can to address the ignorance. The 4th bullet there is that we are, in fact, at the risk of sounding a bit melodramatic, we are the most distracted generation in the history of mankind. Social media has changed everything. There are good things about it. We can all talk about this in Zoom. Some of you are in your living rooms. You didn't have to travel. You didn't have to find parking. Lots of good benefits from the technology and from social media, but lots of bad. And so we are seeing humanity's successes and victories, and we're also seeing humanity's backside. And so I think we have to be quite aware and vigilant, right? The Bible says, be sober, be awake, have your eyes wide open, because as distracted as we are, this is also the age of misinformation. And so when it comes to public health and private choices, I want you to keep in mind that not everyone's incentives are aligned. And so as a physician, my goal is to improve personal and public health. There are financial incentives, there are political incentives, there are religious, social, and cultural incentives that may in fact be hazardous to your health. And so we're going to dive into some of these and help you hopefully to make more informed choices. So as a quick recap of what we talked about in our last session, again, we talked about COVID, the origins of it, how we do studies. Hopefully you can go back to some of that recording and get some additional insights from that and even some more questions, hopefully. But I think these two panels really sum up that last session. And the one on the left says the choices we make end up making us, right? And as I alluded to in the last session, your health today is the sum total of your level of activity, your diet, your genes, and really everything you've done over the course of your life, most importantly, over the last decade or so. And so all of those choices that you've made in the last decade really determine your fitness and your wellness today, right? How you've handled your money, how you've handled your relationships, and how you've handled your health, all come together today in October of 2021 to either make you well or unwell. And so the question I want you to ponder as we go through this is, what will your life be in October of 2031? What are the choices that we're going to make over the next decade that will either make us well or unwell when it comes to our health, how we handle our money, and how we handle our relationships? And in relationships, I want to emphasize, I'm including your vertical and your horizontal relationships, because they absolutely positively matter. And so your choices matter, and your choices you make end up making you. And the panel on your right, I think, sums up what we're dealing with this pandemic right away. If your personal choices have a victim, it is no longer a personal choice. You have to think about other people. You have to think about people who are weaker than you, people whose immune systems are not as strong as yours, people who, frankly, can't handle it if they got one more infection, okay? And so we are connected. And so if your personal choices have a victim, it is no longer a personal choice. It is undeniable that we are connected and we are a society. So today we're going to talk about a different kind of choice, not communicable diseases or infectious diseases like last week. We're going to talk about personal choices, how you sleep, how you eat, what the scale is telling you, what your cholesterol is telling you, what your doctor is telling you, whether you want to hear it or not. And I call these lifestyle choices because I'm going to share with you some things that you're going to go, oh man, I'm sad I logged into this because it's kind of bad news. But the good news is that most of these, we'll get into genetics in a moment, most of these are lifestyle diseases. And so if you are afflicted with any of them, there are things you can do, right? This is not a terminal condition. None of these conditions are terminal conditions I'm going to share with you. And so it's important to understand, again, knowledge is power. Your choices absolutely positively matter. So let's dive in and get into these lifestyle diseases. So what are lifestyle diseases? There are a lot of them. We could be here every day for the next year talking about multiple different diseases, particularly how they all interact. But I've chosen three because I think the message around these three really spill over into one another and into many, many other conditions as well. So today we're going to talk about obesity. We're going to talk about type 2 or adult diabetes. And then we're going to talk about what I call vascular diseases. So let me step back a little bit about genetics. So in my family, for example, there are very few people in my immediate family, maybe one, who have been challenged with cancer. And so as a family of 8 boys, 2 girls, right? And when we look at our children and our grandparents, it is very uncommon to have cancer in my family. Okay, and I say this to say genes matter. There are families where cancer runs through every generation and affects everyone who lives long enough. And then there are families like mine. My family is what will be described as a metabolic family. We're a family plagued by dyslipidemia, stroke, heart disease, obesity, not cancer. Very interesting. And so, unlike cancer, which is partially lifestyle, we have an opportunity to get educated and change how we live so that we can preserve and protect our well-being. So let's dive in and let's talk about obesity. You know, one of the points I want to make about obesity, when you talk to your doctor about your weight, your body mass index, this is not a cosmetic question, right? And so the question is not, you know, how do I look in these jeans? Why are my clothes so tight? That's a separate discussion for a separate audience. The issue tonight is, what is my risk of stroke, heart disease, sleep apnea, and sudden death in the next 10 years? That's the level of obesity that I'm talking about. And so when we talk about obesity, it is a very difficult conversation to have with your doctor. And those of you who may have children who are struggling with obesity, I'm going to speak for maybe all pediatricians when I say this. It is a very difficult conversation for pediatricians to have with you about your child's body mass index. So it's true confession. We would rather not bring it up. We would rather not talk about it because the general public sees obesity as a cosmetic problem. We are painfully aware in healthcare that this is beyond cosmetology. This is a clinical crisis that threatens the life of young people every single day. We have young people who are in their early teens who have changes in their coronary arteries, changes in their aorta that we used to see in people in their 40s and 50s. Okay, and so we are seeing kind of a migration of adult type diseases that we now see in the pediatric population. I will submit to you in my training when I was at Children's there in Pittsburgh, I may have seen in my 7 years of residency, chief residency, critical care fellowship, I may have seen 1 or 2 young women or men with pulmonary emboli, meaning a blood clot that starts somewhere in the body, goes to the lungs and causes trouble. We see multiple young people every year now with pulmonary emboli and deep vein thromboses. In fact, as a pediatrician, didn't really read about it, didn't really study it. It wasn't on my boards the first time I took them, okay? And so something has happened over the last 20 years in the overall health of children in the United States, where children are now affected by adult diseases. So we are losing this war. I have patients who are 200 pounds who are not teenagers. I have patients who are 150 pounds who are not in school yet. You heard me right. A 4-year-old, 150 pounds. Okay? And so this is real. And some of these kids are in your families. And some of them are not teens, and they may be 200 pounds. And if you're not careful, they'll be 300 pounds. And if you continue to ignore it, they will become 400-pound people, because obesity is very complicated. So on the right, your right, is a summary of about 1,200, a study that was looking at the genetics of obesity. And so the question here is, how much of this is my genes? Can I actually change my lifestyle and impact my obesity? There's clearly a genetic component to obesity. We know that in identical twins, for example, compared to fraternal twins, the likelihood of obesity is much higher in identical twins. There have been adoption studies of identical twins where the adult size, the adult BMI of the adopted twin is more consistent with the BMI of the biological parents than the adopted parents. There's clearly a genetic component to obesity. However, the current epidemic does not have a purely genetic basis. Culture can actually be what's been described as obesogenic, meaning your culture can make you obese. Your culture can, in fact, make you fat. And what do I mean by culture? What do I mean by culture is your family, your neighborhood, the people you interact with, the human beings that teach you, where you get your knowledge and your attitudes and your assumptions from. That's your culture. When should you eat? How should you eat? What should you eat? How should you exercise? Is that a part of your lifestyle or not? That's your culture. That's your culture. And so it's very clear that there's a genetic component, and you may not be able to shake that, but there's clearly a cultural component that is related to lifestyle. This is a distribution of obesity in the United States. And when you look at this, what's clear to me, as you look at the Southeast in particular, the rates of morbid or clinically significant obesity is much, much higher in the Southeast. I'm not sure what is happening in Michigan or in the Upper Peninsula. I have not a clue why this is so different here. And maybe it's connected to Canada, who knows? But there's clearly a relationship between where you live and your risk of morbid obesity, right? And so that's, again, the impact of culture. We also know that there's much more fast food in our culture, right? Especially with the pandemic. A lot of people don't shop as much, they're ordering out more, and so it's very, very easy to put on that pandemic pudge, right? I know all about it. And so, we have to be careful. The contemporary TV dinner, when I was a kid, a TV dinner was a dinner you put in the microwave and you ate with your family. Now a TV dinner is dinner you eat in front of the TV, right? And so it's a completely different way of approaching food, how we think about food, and how we approach food. And for many of us, food, frankly, is not your friend. And the third bullet there addresses the culture of obesity, and that is the sedentary lifestyle, just sitting there, not moving. Our bodies are designed to move. We are designed to sweat. We are designed to have your heart rate go up on a regular basis and feel that resistance. Your body is designed for that. Left alone, you're going to get diseases. So let's talk a little bit about where all of this is going. And this is a little review about the biology of obesity. And I want you to appreciate kind of what's happening here. And I'm going to introduce a couple concepts. So in your upper left here, there's a discussion about insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes, impaired weight loss or obesity. That's the end, okay? It really starts here with fatty, and I have to admit, delicious food, okay? Nobody likes eating cardboard. Fat tastes good. That's just the way it is, okay? But there's a way to modify, and there's a way to modulate this so that it doesn't kill you. We know that fatty foods increase intestinal permeability, which means that the amount of food, the amount of fat content of your food actually facilitates, allows, encourages the absorption of those micronutrients, good and bad, through your intestines into your bloodstream. And then your bloodstream now has to handle it. Has to handle the carbs, it has to handle the fat. And let's face it, it is designed to handle it. I mean, that's kind of how we're made, right? Fearfully and wonderfully. But when you increase, in addition to the lipids going in, there's also bacterial lipids in there as well, because our gut have bacteria. So all of that kind of ekes into your bloodstream. And so a higher fat content means higher bacterial lipids. Other toxins that may or may not be in your food are now in your bloodstream, and you have to handle that. So your kidneys are going to be handling that, your liver is going to be handling that, or not. And so what happens over time is your body has this chronic burn, this very slow inflammatory state in your body. You can't feel it, you don't get a fever, but what's happening is your body is being, on many levels, oxidized. You are dealing with the stress of a high-fat diet. Okay, it doesn't raise your heart rate, it doesn't do anything like that. But if we measured the amount of low-grade inflammation going on in your body that is aging you, that is damaging your blood vessels everywhere in your body, it would be higher. We also know that if you smoke, that low-grade inflammation is even higher. We know that if you drink excessively, that degree of inflammation is higher still. And so all of these factors contribute to low-grade inflammation that over time accelerates aging, promotes destruction of blood vessels and other organs, and ultimately death. That chronic systemic inflammation also has another adverse effect, and that adverse effect is its impact on insulin. So it creates what's called insulin resistance. And insulin resistance is a problem on a number of levels, but it really is the basis for adult or type 2 diabetes. We'll get into how insulin works in a minute, because we're going to talk about type 2 diabetes. But I want you to understand this. Insulin is a growth hormone. And so if your body is chronically inflamed, smoldering because of how you eat and your sedentary lifestyle, your body then becomes resistant to insulin. And the way the body deals with insulin resistance is it makes more insulin to overcome the resistance. And whenever you hear the word insulin, think growth, think more fat deposition. And so that's the process of type 2 diabetes. And that's why as you eat fatty foods and you're inactive and you're chronically inflamed, your body becomes progressively more insulin resistant, and then obesity sets in. Clinical obesity, again, I want to emphasize this, has many, many causes. There is a genetic component to this. Some of you are on medications that will make you insulin resistant and can actually cause your blood sugar to go up, and you may even develop type 2 diabetes related to the medication. Adding sugar, junk food or fast food, processed foods, high fructose corn syrup, we've all familiar with this. Low-grade stress, boy, oh boy. We can probably have a whole other discussion about the impact of stress and obesity, but let me say this. That low-grade inflammation that I talked about that comes with your diet can be accelerated even more if you are chronically stressed. And I'm talking worry, anxiety, sleep deprivation, because all of that stress increases cortisol. You know what happens with cortisol? Cortisol makes you even more insulin resistant. And so if you are stressed, you become more insulin resistant. And as I mentioned before, what does your body do when you're insulin resistant? It makes more insulin, which means more growth. Sitting around actually is pro-inflammatory. It will put you in a more pro-inflammatory state. Exercise, getting your heart rate up, breaking a sweat actually is anti-inflammatory. Now, I'm in my 50s, and after walking 4, 5, 6 miles or running, it's hard for me to imagine that it's anti-inflammatory because everything hurts. But I know it's anti-inflammatory, and I know that the more active we are over time, the longer you live, it improves your lipid profile. And I'm giving you a bit of a sneak peek. It actually increases your insulin sensitivity, which means your body makes less insulin, less growth, and you actually lose weight. I added an additional panel to this about the complexity of obesity. None of these points, I've alluded to all of them, but I really wanted to focus on the graphic. The woman who's affected in this graphic has her hands to her head and her face is down, because obesity is more than high-calorie food, sedentary diet, heredity in your genes. Obesity also is emotional and spiritual. And that is to say, there is an anxiety and depression component of this that does not help in the battle against obesity. And so you can restrict your calories and start to get more active, but if you don't address the emotional, psychological, and spiritual components of this, about how you eat, why you eat, how much you eat, many of those adaptations and adjustments, they won't last. And so you really have to be able to take care of yourself and learn about yourself if you're going to win this so-called battle of the bulge. So why is this so critical for us? Again, it's because obesity is not a cosmetic issue to your healthcare provider. And I'm going to echo what I said earlier today, because we struggle with this in healthcare. If I see a child who is 8 years old, who is 180 pounds, trust me, it's going to be very difficult to have a discussion about weight loss with that parent and that child. We're only human, okay? And I make this statement to make an appeal to say, hey, go easy on us. We're not calling your child fat. What we're saying is we are really worried about your child's health. And when you look at this graphic, from the head to the toes, obesity will impact the health of every person who is struggling with obesity. Migraines, depression, pseudotumor cerebri. You don't need to necessarily get into that, but it's one of the complications of obesity. Obstructive sleep apnea, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease and asthma, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, type 2 diabetes and metabolic syndrome, which we're going to get to in a second, polycystic ovarian syndrome in women, venous stasis disease and damage to the legs, cardiovascular disease, high blood pressure, dyslipidemia. You can see the list here, and I think most people in this audience are familiar with all of the complications of obesity. And I share this slide to say, when we start talking about this, it is not cosmetic. We'll get to the cosmetic part, but the discussion about obesity is a discussion about saving your life and making you well. So let's talk a little bit about obesity and its connection to diabetes. Is there a connection between obesity and diabetes? The answer is absolutely. And so, as we've alluded to earlier, there's clearly a genetic component to this in the upper right. Being overweight, as I mentioned, increases your risk for type 2 diabetes because of the problem with insulin and progressive insulin resistance as a result of the chronic, low-grade, smoldering inflammation that's going on in your body. You can't feel it, but it's actually happening, I promise you. Smoking contributes to type 2 diabetes in as much as it adds to that smoldering. It adds to that low-grade inflammation that's aging you and damaging your body, first at the microscopic level, then at a level where everyone can see it. High blood pressure, high cholesterol, excessive alcohol consumption, and of course, aging. But type 2 diabetes is not inevitable as you age. Okay, it doesn't work like that. You have to have multiple components all kind of conspiring against you. And again, we're talking about lifestyle changes to address lifestyle diseases. Diabetes, really, it's Latin for sweet urine. Yes, somebody somewhere along the line back in the day, accidentally or on purpose, tasted urine and said, wow, this doesn't taste like urine. It's really way too sweet. And that's because people had sugar in their urine. This panel on your left really gets into all of the organs that are affected. The top of this is your brain. Right below the brain is your heart. Underneath your heart is your pancreas, which is where insulin is made. Just to the upper left of the pancreas is your kidneys. And then on the upper to the right-hand side of the heart are the blood vessels that are all being affected over time by diabetes. There are two types of diabetes. The first type is called type 1 diabetes. It happens in children. That one seems to be a little more genetic actually than type 2. Once it happens, it's pretty much permanent. Type 2 diabetes actually, because of the origin of it, because it's lifestyle related, you can actually have type 2 diabetes and you can change your lifestyle and make it go away, which is for some conditions. Type 1 diabetes, not so. So the problem with type 1 diabetes is there is no insulin. As a result, here is sugar in the blood, and what you need is insulin to be able to get sugar out of the blood and into your muscles and into your tissues. Due to the lack of insulin, your body simply manufactures more sugar, thinking that it needs more sugar to overcome the problem, and in fact, you become let's say hyperglycemic with high blood sugars. You begin to pee a lot because high blood sugar drags water out of your body. You also get very thirsty because the high blood sugar is dragging water out of your body. And in addition to that, you begin to lose weight because as you're peeing out all of that sugar, you're actually peeing out a lot of calories. So you tend to lose weight if you don't know what you're dealing with type 1 diabetes. In type 2 diabetes, the problem is the cells don't respond to the insulin, as I mentioned before. The cells are actually insulin resistant. And so here's a different cartoon showing you the same thing. Here is a cell The white dots here are glucose within the cell. And here's an open channel for glucose. It can go right into the cell with no problem at all. And here is this little kind of greenish helmet is an insulin receptor. So insulin in green binds to that receptor and helps glucose to get into the cell. And that's what happens normally. If you have type 2 diabetes, the insulin receptors stop working. It's like a light switch that's not connected to anything else. And so glucose cannot get into the cell. And so what the cell does is it signals your body to make more glucose. And so that is the problem with type 2 diabetes, insulin insensitivity. What are the symptoms of type 2 diabetes? Well, there are many. And they all kind of are related to what I had alluded to or suggested earlier. Frequent or excessive urination, more than you're used to, excessive thirst, feeling tired throughout the day because your calories are going out in your urine, so you feel really depleted. Plus, you might become dehydrated as well. So it may be that you're out of shape. It may be that you have type 2 diabetes. It doesn't happen overnight. It happens over weeks, sometimes in really slow motion. So if you're feeling like you're dragging, if you're feeling more tired than you expect to be, if you're peeing more than usual, you're getting up at night to pee when you're not used to getting up at night to pee, you may in fact have type 2 diabetes and not know it. You have wounds that don't heal, again, because of that chronic low-grade inflammation. It really impairs your body doing what it naturally does, which is healing wounds very well. Sometimes there's a darkening of your skin, and you may have your vision blurred. Because what begins to happen is the glucose deposits in the lens of your eyes, and it can actually give you blurry vision as well. So with all this talk about diabetes, I think the question then, with all the smoldering that's going on in your left there, how do you prevent type 2 diabetes? And to me, this is the good news. This is a good part of all of this. Many of you on this call have type 2 diabetes, and you're dealing with it. But a healthy diet, medications if necessary, not everyone needs medication because it is a lifestyle disease. Losing weight will make you more insulin sensitive, your own body's insulin. So hopefully you don't end up on insulin. But even if you are, the more active you are, the healthier you eat and you lose weight, your insulin need will go down. And remember, if you're giving yourself insulin, it is a growth hormone. And so the less insulin that you have to give yourself, the better. And of course, exercise. So increasing your activity reduces that smoldering. It increases your insulin sensitivity. So there are choices that you have to make in order to get in control of your type 2 diabetes. And if you don't have diabetes, this is fantastic because the choices you make today will make sure, despite whatever's in your family, right? Genes matter, will make it easier for you to live the life that you want without diabetes, despite your history. But it's up to you and the choices you make. We're on the back end here. I put this slide in here because one of the things that we're thinking about and learning about when it comes to diabetes is ultimately what we may be seeing in diabetes due to this chronic low-grade inflammation that I talked about is what many researchers have called mitochondrial failure, energy failure. You may remember from high school, the mitochondria is the so-called powerhouse of the cell. It's where every cell gets all of its energy from. We know that 70% of our caloric requirements are 70% of the calories we need for life, basically, is to maintain mitochondria. The other 30% are for growth. And if you eat more than that, then it turns it into fat. But we also know that low-grade smoldering inflammation poisons mitochondria everywhere. And so that low-grade chronic inflammation that comes from processed food, high-fat diets, smoking, excessive alcohol, the cares of this life, all of those conspire to impair the function of our mitochondria, causing low-grade inflammation, worsening mitochondrial function, and can affect the heart, the brain, kidneys, your eyes, all of your, what we say, microvasculature throughout the body. and can affect every organ of your body. And so it's really important, if you can, to control your type 2 diabetes as best you can and prevent mitochondrial failure. So what's the good news? The good news is we are fearfully and wonderfully made. And activity matters, diet matters, and you matter. So ponder that for a moment. I'm just going to take a sip here. So just because I am a physician, I can speak for myself and tell you that this story is my story. I've lived with this and struggled with keeping my weight under control and managing my diet, because as I mentioned to you earlier, cancer is not a major threat in my family. My mom and dad did not drink, they did not smoke, and I'm pretty sure that it helped them quite a bit. But that was the example we saw. And so I think that that helped quite a bit. Having said that, we still deal with our weight. All of us do on some level or another. And so this is a living daily battle, a series of choices every single day. And so what I'm sharing with you is not just from a book. These are my personal experiences. Any activity, I'm talking walking, jogging, you don't have to run, you don't have to swim. You got to get out of your house or get a treadmill, do something. Any activity you do that increases your metabolic rate will prolong your life. Any activity. Get up, get out, do something. And if you can do it with someone else, it's even better. Do something, any activity, your body will reward you if you change your lifestyle and become more active. Your diet matters. Increasing your vegetables. That doesn't say get rid of meat necessarily, but I have to put here in the second bullet, consider a vegan diet. The evidence around cardiovascular health is not debatable. A vegan diet is a healthier diet. A plant-based, low-fat diet is anti-inflammatory. Okay, that is a fact. It's not open for debate. What's debatable is whether you subscribe to that diet or not the benefits of that diet. You say, well, why not? And I guess what I should have put there is a vegetarian diet, not vegan diet. A vegan diet is a very difficult diet. Many people who try to be vegan end up vegetarian because vegan is a very difficult lifestyle. But hey, if you can do it, that's probably even better. Having said that, the evidence comparing a vegetarian diet to a vegan diet is not much of an advantage from again, looking at lifestyle diseases. A strict vegetarian diet is extremely beneficial. A vegan diet is probably a little bit more beneficial than a vegetarian diet, and both are better than a low plant, high fat diet. And again, minimize fat and processed food. And I'm going to end here because this is really an introduction for the third session. That is you matter. You matter. Taking care of yourself, minimizing drama, minimizing stress is very, very important to keeping yourself in an anti-inflammatory, chill state. It is absolutely important. It may be as important as what you eat and how you sleep. They're probably all connected. And so taking care of yourself, putting yourself first when it matters is really, really, really very important. You know, if you've ever flown on a plane, you know, they tell you, right? If things are in crisis, put the oxygen on you, then on the person who can't do it for themselves. And right now, frankly, in this pandemic, self-care and wellness are how we're going to make it through this. If you are trying to take care of everybody else and ignore your own needs, you're not going to make it. And the people you love aren't going to have you to help them. So take care of yourself, minimize drama, minimize stress, and get counseling. Huge advocate for getting some counseling and some coaching. I want to thank you all for your attention, and I'm going to open it up for any questions that may be out there. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much, Dr.
Absolutely.
Forbes. Thank you so much. In fact, we're going to take questions, but I want to make sure that we as a community, we as a church, and all those who have been blessed by this second session, if you will join me in giving thanks to Dr. Forbes and giving thanks to God for Dr. Forbes. So whether you put something in the chat on Zoom or in the comment section on Facebook, or you give an emoji or give a smile if you're on camera, we should show our appreciation for this. And as you do that,
Thank you, brother.
I'm going to invite Reverend Denise Walker to join us again. And we're going to field as many questions as we can in the remaining minutes that we have left. So whether you're on Zoom or on Facebook, we'll try to go back and forth. So please bear with us. But if you do have questions, please type them in the chat right now on Zoom, and or you can type in the questions if you're on Facebook, and we will do our best to reach those questions and have them addressed by Dr. Forbes. So is there one? As Reverend Denise comes to help us facilitate, is there one?
I myself have a question, Dr. Forbes.
Sure.
Regarding type 2 diabetes, I believe you did say that it is reversible. Is it reversible if it's brought on by the onset of medications?
The short answer to that is, can you hear me? I hope I'm not muted. I can't tell.
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, the short answer to that is yes. If it is brought on by medications, that is one of the areas where we know we can definitely reverse it. It does depend on the medication. And because the medications that can bring on type 2 diabetes are medications that generally make you insulin resistant. So for example, some people who have very bad asthma are on steroids, oral steroids, not the inhaled steroids. They're on oral steroids a lot. And steroids, just like cortisol, will make you insulin resistant. And if you're on them long enough, you can definitely get type 2 diabetes from your steroids used to treat your asthma. And so what it means for those people is they actually have to be much more careful about their diet, their exercise, because again, the medication they need to control their disease makes them insulin resistant. So that is a huge challenge.
Thank you.
Yep.
Another question in the chat, is fatty liver reversible?
Yes. Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, fatty liver is definitely reversible. I think that it is related to your diet. Fatty liver is in part driven by the amount of carbohydrates in your diet. And so I'll give you an example of how powerful this is. One of the parts of the pathway for bariatric surgery, which is surgery to reduce the total volume of the stomach or bypass the stomach to treat severe obesity, life-threatening obesity, involves kind of the runway up to the surgery is a low-carb diet. And the goal of the low-carb diet is to actually shrink the liver. So you're on a low-carb diet for about 2 weeks. And the reason for that is it depletes the glycogen that's in the liver, and it reduces the size of the liver just by eliminating carbohydrates in your diet for 2 weeks. And they learned that. In the early days, that wasn't a part of the pathway. But by simply reducing the amount of carbohydrates, it reduces the size of the liver. And then over time, as you lose weight, the fatty liver also becomes reversible. You can see their liver enzymes get better and everything. Pretty impressive.
Thank you. Another question by a viewer. Can you discuss the positives and negatives of statins?
Oh, yeah, great question. Wow. So statins are a group of medications that help your body to metabolize cholesterol more effectively. Cholesterol is in a lot of our food. We need cholesterol. Your brain is made of cholesterol, so you need it. But some people, because of their genetics, metabolize cholesterol and make poisons. And so what statins do is it interrupts that pathway that allows you to make less toxic versions of cholesterols. And so many people believe that everyone should be on a statin. There are, however, what are called pharmacogenomic risks. There are certain people who, if they take statins, it actually can cause injury to their muscles and even to their liver. And so you want to be careful about that. And your doctor who's going to prescribe that will teach you about that and warn you about that. And so if you start taking statins and you have cramps or anything like that, you want to stop immediately because it means that you can't take statins. It turns out, sidebar, again, a personal note, in my family, none of us can take statins. Everyone who's been prescribed it developed cramps. So it's not an option for us. So there is clearly a genetic component to this in how you handle cholesterol, how we treat cholesterol. We have an option, but for some people, because of your genes, statins is not going to be a part of your treatment plan, but they're very effective.
Well, thank you. Another question from a viewer. And the question is, why are people diagnosed to be pre-diabetic for years?
Yeah, great question. So in the old days, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, you were either diabetic or not. It was binary. In the 80s, probably late 70s, early 80s, it became clear from watching people over time that there were people who were on their way to becoming diabetic, type 2 diabetes, that is. And if you adjusted their lifestyle and you monitored them, they would not become diabetic. And so we've learned that there is a kind of a journey to type 2 diabetes, really. And so if you're able to be diagnosed with pre-diabetes, you can change your lifestyle and not become diabetic. And again, in the old days, you were either diabetic or you were not. And now if you're diagnosed with pre-diabetes, that's actually good news, because it means you can alter your lifestyle and avoid becoming diabetic altogether. That's the whole idea, is to catch it early with pre-diabetes. And just to expand on that a little bit, we know that the diagnosis of diabetes, type 2 diabetes, is the clinical equivalent of a heart attack, which means your risk of a heart attack or stroke after you're diagnosed with diabetes is higher than the general population, and is the same as someone who has had a heart attack. So if you've had a heart attack, your risk of a heart attack is even higher. Your risk of a stroke is even higher. If you've had diabetes, your risk is the same for heart attack and stroke as someone who's already had a heart attack. So and I will tell you, when people are diagnosed with diabetes, it should break your heart. It should make you sad. It is a life-changing diagnosis. Because if you had a heart attack, you'd probably feel the same way. And so it's important to go through that grief, because you're going to need that energy to change your lifestyle so that you can really control this thing.
Dr. Forbes, there's a question from one of our viewers on Facebook, and he writes, while taking statins, I was told that the vitamin CoQ10 works very well in supporting statins and can reduce harm done to you by statins. Is this true?
Yeah, great question. The FDA will not stand behind that because the quality of the evidence around CoQ10 is not as strong as the evidence in favor of statins. And I don't know if I answered the earlier question properly. The role of statins is to reduce the risk of heart attack and stroke in patients who have dyslipidemia. So if you're genetically at risk and your lipids are high or your lifestyle is of such, statins will reduce your risk of heart attack and stroke over time while you work on your lifestyle. And so CoQ10 has been looked at and used. It's over the counter. It has not borne out over time to augment or increase the effects of statins alone. So yeah, it's been looked at. It just, yeah, I wish there was a benefit.
We have another question by a viewer. Is sleep apnea reversible?
Yeah, great question. It depends on the reason you have sleep apnea. If your sleep apnea is related to obesity and you lose a substantial amount of weight, then for many patients, their sleep apnea goes away. I'll share a story, and some of you may identify with this. I had a friend years ago who was asked if she snored when she slept, which taught me as a doctor to never ask my patients if they snore when they sleep, because they're asleep. They have no idea, right? And so she went away on a trip with her girlfriends, and her girlfriends were the ones who told her that they could hardly sleep because she snored. Turns out she had sleep apnea. She ended up getting a CPAP device and tried to lose weight, did her lifestyle thing. It really didn't work for her. She ended up getting bariatric surgery, lost weight, got rid of almost all of her medications and her sleep apnea machine. So, I think the key, and my point in telling this story, is that these are lifestyle diseases that are reversible. They are absolutely reversible. Obesity is reversible. Type 2 diabetes, reversible. Okay, so I think we really have an opportunity here with the education and the coaching and the counseling to really kind of turn the table on these diseases.
Thank you. A viewer has a question. What is the role of water?
Oh, great question. Wow. I'm glad you asked that. So it turns out, biologically, unlike your puppy, humans can't tell the difference between thirst and hunger. We're not as good. And so if you are dehydrated or underhydrated, you will feel like you're hungry. And so water is very, very, very important. And you can look online to find out how many glasses a day you need for your weight and all that. But it's very important, if you're going to control your weight, you have to stay hydrated. Because if you're dehydrated, you're going to think you're hungry and you're going to find something to eat. Or worse, you're going to find something to snack on that makes you feel better, which probably has salt, which is going to make you even thirstier. So now you're dehydrated and you've eaten salt, so you're going to eat more. You're not going to drink as much. And so if you're thinking you're hungry and you shouldn't be, drink some water. You're probably a little bit dehydrated or underhydrated. Yeah, so water's key.
We have 2 more questions. Why did the threshold for normal blood pressure change recently?
Wow, that's a great question. I think it's going to keep changing. I think the latest guidelines are JL7. There will probably be a JL8 and the JL9 and JL10. And all of these guidelines are evidence-based. Some of the evidence is studies that are done prospectively. Some of the studies are observational studies, and sometimes those studies are in conflict. There was actually an article in the New England Journal last week that looked at tight control of hypertension, keeping people under 150 systolic. I'm sorry, under 130 systolic versus customary control, which is 130 to 150. And they did find that for all of the endpoints, heart attack, stroke, those outcomes were actually better in patients who had tighter control, who kept their systolics under 130. Now, the risk of keeping your blood pressure under 130, the older you get, like if you're over 65, over 75 even, and they did report this in the study, is low blood pressure, syncope or fainting. Some people have a need to have a higher blood pressure because they have kidney disease. And so each individual patient is going to be different, so you have to talk to your doctor. The guidelines will change as the evidence changes. And that's the only reason the guidelines change is we get new evidence and we have to respond to the evidence.
Last question.
When the inactivity of children today often due to technological alternatives, are there underlying medical conditions that lead to inactivity in children?
Medical conditions that can lead to inactivity? I can't think of any that can lead to inactivity. Inactivity is really, it's lifestyle, right? I mean, so the AAP has some recommendations. And one of them is there should be no TV before the age of 2. I can hear the gasps, even though you guys are all muted. After the age of 2, you should not have a TV in your room. As one of my pastors has said, your bed is where you sleep. It's not where you watch TV. And so there are no conditions that I'm aware of that can make you sedentary, unless you're talking about behavioral health diagnoses. Because if you are depressed, you will be sedentary. But again, everyone is different with that. Some people in their depression actually are a bit hyper. And we'll talk about that maybe next time. Everyone's very different. But I can't think of any conditions that will make you sedentary as a child. That's a lifestyle choice.
Dr. Forbes, we cannot thank you enough. This, just like the first session, has been phenomenal.
Thank you.
I'm going to do 2 last things. One, I'm going to invite the executive director of the BTC Center Incorporated, our 501c3, Dr. Monica Reese, to just share a few words. As she comes, let me also express our gratitude for our contracting coordinator and consultant, Denise Walker, for a phenomenal job in this, and all of our participants, whether you've been watching and participating through Zoom, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, or calling in. We thank you so much. Please bear in mind that we'll have one more session with Dr. Forbes on next week. And as well, we have a couple of other things that we want to also make you aware of. In addition to next week, Thursday, October 14th, at 7 p.m., we'll have our third and final session with Dr. Forbes. So please join us again in the same way that you have. But also bear in mind that on Saturday, October 16th, from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m., we have our second session in the Safe and Healthy Relationships educational series on domestic violence, where we will have Reverend Dr. LaWanna Butler, PhD, lead us in the session 2 on intimate partner violence, religion, and the role of the African American church. This is for women only, and it is in building and in person, following all COVID protocols. So we're asking that all women who want to participate, please register as soon as possible. I'm going to give you the number, which is area code 412-254-3461. That's 412-254-3461. Again, that is on Saturday, October 16th, 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. It's in the building, in person, at Baptist Temple Church, 7241 Ray Street, Pittsburgh, PA 15208. It is, this session, unlike the first, is for women only, and it does require registration so that they can adequately prepare. I won't be there. That's 412-254-3461. Last but not least, on Saturday, October 23rd, that's the following Saturday, October 23rd, from 10 a.m. to 12 noon, we have a health screening and vaccination event. A health screening and vaccination event. This is being led by the BTC Center Incorporated, 501c3. And at this health screening and vaccination event, you can get a flu vaccination. You can get your first COVID vaccination. You can also receive a COVID booster, and you can get your blood pressure screened, all at the same time. It will also be in the building at Baptist Temple, and you can come on that day. We're also grateful to the community partners who are also participating and helping to sponsor this event, namely the Alma Illery Health Center, Bethany Christian Ministries, the Allegheny Health Network, Rite Aid, and Baptist Temple itself. So please avail yourself of both of those things, as well as to join us next week for the final session with Dr. Forbes. So at this time, I'm going to ask if Dr. Monica Reese will just share a few words, and then we'll be off and running.
Thank you so much, Pastor Lyde. Dr. Forbes, on behalf of the BTC, the BTC Center Incorporated, our board of directors, we can't thank you enough for this wonderful series of health education that you've been imparting us with. I think I probably speak for many to say I've learned quite a bit, and we are very appreciative of you taking the time to impart your knowledge and wisdom to us. We, as Pastor said, we thank our community partners, and especially we want to thank the Pittsburgh Foundation, because thanks to them, this funding was made available to us to do this health education series and other programming that we are doing. So we're very grateful for that. And again, thank you to everyone who's participating tonight. And just please continue to join us for our ongoing programming. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Monica. Dr. Forbes, I'm as proud as a pastor can be because as you mentioned earlier, we're really trying to spread truth, and you have helped in immeasurable ways to help us in that because we recognize that according to our faith, God wants us to live healthy and whole. And now we know that a big contributor to that is our personal and private choices about lifestyle. And that though we have some inheritances culturally, that we can, armed with the right information, really seek to overcome those things that don't have to predetermine our health. And we're really grateful for the breadth and depth of your expertise and the love and care. And it's clear that you're also anchored in the faith, and that always helps too, because to do this, it is helpful to know that there's a resource in God. And likewise, that there's a faith community where people are seeking to live in this way. Last but not least, this is a way, for those that don't know, this is Baptist Temple trying to reimagine Christian education. So if you're joining with us for the first time, if you're a member, a non-member, a member of the community, we're seeking as many churches and communities of faith to really think about how to apply the faith in real life issues and circumstances. This is a part of the vision of our New Life Christian Education, headed up by Minister James Wimberly and the New Life team, so that it is, in addition to learning about the scriptures, it's following the script for how to live a godly life in wholeness and good health. So thank you, Dr. Forbes. Thank you to everyone for joining us. We look forward to seeing you again next week, 7 o'clock, by any means you intend to get to. Don't forget to register for our second series on safe and healthy relationships, educational series. And don't forget about our event, our vaccination health screening event on October 23rd. We pray God's blessings on everyone, and we'll see you again really soon. Take care. And everyone who can hear me, say grace and peace.
Grace and peace, brother. Thank you.
Grace and peace.
Terrific. Good night.